On Father's Day, my daughter sent me a gift box that was supposed to be a surprise, but my wife looked at it and whispered, "Don't open it." I asked why, and she told me to look closer. I froze in shock. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. You won't believe what was inside that box. "Dad, do you even understand that I need the money now, not after you're dead?" The coffee mug shattered against the hardwood floor. The brown liquid spilled onto the Persian rug. Sophia's face flushed red, her perfectly manicured fingers still trembling from dropping the mug. I gripped the inheritance documents tighter, 30 years of careful planning reduced to weapons in my daughter's desperate hands. The papers crumpled under my white knuckles. "Sophia, I am not an ATM. You will get your inheritance when the time comes." Patrick settled deeper into our leather couch. His mocking smile widened. "Come on, Will. She's your only daughter. What's a few $1,000s to help us out?" A few $1,000s? The man had no shame. Last month, it was gambling debts. Before that, Sophia's shopping sprees. The requests never stopped. They just got bolder. "Help you out?" I stood up slowly, my 66-year-old joints protesting. "I've helped you out for 3 years straight. My retirement fund is not your personal bank." Linda appeared in the doorway, a dish towel twisted in her hands. "Please, everyone, calm down. We can talk about this reasonably." "Reasonably?" Sophia spun on her mother. "He's sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars while we're drowning in debt." "Debt you created?" I said quietly. "Debt from your choices." The family photo on the fireplace mantel was face down. It had either fallen during Sophia's tantrum or someone had deliberately turned it over. The silver frame reflected the ceiling light like a mirror, showing nothing but an empty glare. Patrick leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Look, old man, you're not getting any younger. Why not enjoy sharing your wealth while you're alive to see us thank you for it?" Old man. The disrespect tasted bitter in my mouth, and it was coming from someone who had never held a steady job, who lived off my daughter's credit cards and my occasional generosity. Because I worked 43 years for that money. Each word came out sharper than the last. 43 years of 12-hour days, missed dinners, canceled vacations. So you could have a comfortable childhood, Sophia. So your mother and I could retire with dignity. "Dignity?" Sophia laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "What's dignified about hoarding money while your daughter suffers?" "Suffers?" I looked at her designer purse, her fresh highlights, her expensive jewelry, Patrick's new sneakers. Their suffering looked remarkably comfortable. "Your suffering is self-inflicted." The words escaped before I could stop them. Every crisis, every emergency, every desperate plea for cash. You created all of them. The silence tightened like a piano wire. Linda stepped fully into the room, her face pale. "William," she whispered, "maybe we should." "Should what?" Sophia's voice cracked like glass. "Should we keep enabling your selfishness? Should we keep pretending you're a loving father instead of a greedy miser?" The accusations hit like physical blows. Miser, selfish, unloving. 43 years of sacrifice. And this was my reward. Patrick stood up, his expression shifting into something uglier. "You know what I think, Will? I think you enjoy watching us struggle. It makes you feel powerful, doesn't it? Get out." The words came from somewhere deep in my chest. "Both of you, out of my house." "Your house?" Sophia's eyes glittered dangerously. "This house Mom helped pay for. This house where I grew up. You can't just throw your own daughter out. Watch me." But she didn't move. Neither did Patrick. They just stood there like predators who had scented weakness, waiting for me to back down, waiting for the usual apology, the usual compromise, the usual check, written to buy temporary peace. Not this time. I walked to the front door and pulled it wide open. The cool evening air rushed in, bringing the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of neighbors laughing, normal families having normal conversations. How long had it been since we had laughed together? "Sophia," I said without turning around, "take your husband and go. Don't come back until you're ready to have a respectful conversation about your financial problems and your solutions. That don't involve my wallet." "You'll regret this," she hissed, grabbing her purse. "When you're old and sick and you need someone to take care of you, will you remember this moment? Will you remember how you chose money over family?" Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor like gunshots. Patrick followed her, pausing in the doorway. "This isn't over, old man," he muttered. "Family doesn't abandon family." The door slammed shut so hard it rattled the windows. The silence felt heavier than their shouting. I stood frozen at the front door, my hands still gripping the brass handle. Through the decorative glass panels, I watched Sophia's luxury car back aggressively out of our driveway, tires squealing on the pavement. Linda's soft footsteps approached from behind. "William." I turned around slowly. The living room looked like a battlefield. Coffee stains darkened the Persian rug we'd bought for our 20th anniversary. The inheritance documents lay scattered across the hardwood floor like fallen leaves. The overturned family photo caught the lamplight, its silver frame flickering mockingly. 43 years, I whispered, more to myself than to her. I worked extra shifts all through her high school years so she could have new clothes, college textbooks, that car for her 16th birthday. My voice broke. The wedding we couldn't afford, but we paid for anyway. Linda gathered the scattered papers, her movements careful and deliberate. "She's struggling, William. The gambling problem is his choice." The words came out sharper than I intended. Every trip to the casino, every online bet, every lie about where the money went. His choices. I walked to the mantel and set the family photo upright. A 5-year-old Sophia smiled at me, gap-toothed and innocent, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. When had that happy little girl turned into this manipulative stranger demanding my life savings? "Remember when she wanted that dollhouse for Christmas?" I asked, tapping the glass. "The one from the expensive toy store downtown. I worked doubles for 2 months so I could buy it." Linda's silence was answer enough. We both remembered. Just like we remembered the ballet classes, the summer camps, the designer shoes, because all her friends had them. Every sacrifice made gladly for our daughter's happiness. And now she throws coffee mugs at me because I won't hand over my retirement fund. "She didn't throw it at you, William. She threw it at the floor." The distinction felt meaningless. The violence was the same, whether aimed at me or my possessions. The disrespect, identical. I bent down and picked up one of the inheritance documents. The legal language blurred as I read it, but I knew every clause by heart. Years of careful planning, conservative investments, deferred gratification, all so Sophia would be financially secure after we were gone. "It's Patrick's influence," Linda said quietly. "He fills her head with these ideas about what she's owed. Patrick didn't create her greed. He just gave it permission to show itself." The hard truth hung between us. Our daughter had become someone we barely recognized, and we had enabled it, always giving in, always writing the check, always fixing her latest crisis with our money. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the writing style immediately. "Dad, I hope you're happy. The kids need winter coats and school supplies, but I guess your precious money is more important than your grandkids. Don't expect to see them anytime soon." The grandkids, the ultimate weapon in Sophia's arsenal. Lucy and Matthew, 8 and 6, innocent victims in their mother's war for my wallet. She knew exactly where to hit to cause the maximum pain. I showed the text to Linda, her face crumpled. She wouldn't really keep them from us, would she? But we both knew she would. She had done it before, over smaller arguments, a week here, 2 weeks there. Every time we didn't immediately comply with her financial demands, the children used as bargaining chips in her endless quest for cash. "William, maybe we should reconsider." "No." The word came out like a gunshot. "No more. I will not be held hostage by threats about the grandkids. I will not teach Lucy and Matthew that love can be bought, that family relationships are transactions." Linda flinched at my vehemence. In 38 years of marriage, she had rarely seen me this angry. Even during our worst arguments, I'd never spoken with such cold finality. But something had shifted tonight. Some fundamental understanding about my daughter, about our relationship, about the future I'd envisioned for our family. The illusion of loving sacrifice had shattered as completely as that coffee mug. My phone buzzed again. 6 days later, I sat on our front porch with the Sunday paper, trying to find normalcy in the Father's Day morning routine. The coffee had gone cold in my mug, but I held it anyway, watching the neighbors head out for their weekend activities. The Johnsons were loading up their car for what looked like a family outing. The Smiths were working in their garden, their laughter carrying across the quiet residential street. Linda was moving around the kitchen, The soft clinking of breakfast dishes drifted through the open window. We had spent the week in careful conversation, dancing around the Sophia-shaped hole in our family dynamic. Neither of us had heard from her since that night. No calls, no texts, no surprise visit demanding money or reconciliation. The silence felt unnatural. In 3 years of financial crises, Sophia had never gone this long without contacting us. Usually by day 3, she'd call with apologies and smaller requests, testing the waters before launching her next big plea for cash. But this was different. The completeness of the silence felt deliberate, calculated, almost like the calm before a storm. Part of me was relieved, part of me worried. The rumble of a delivery truck broke my thoughts. I looked up from the sports section to see a brown delivery truck pulling up to our curb. Strange. We weren't expecting anything, and Sunday deliveries were rare unless someone paid extra for the weekend service. The driver hopped out, consulted his handheld scanner, and then grabbed a medium-sized box from the back. He walked up the path with the professional efficiency of someone working overtime on a holiday. "William Carson? That's me. Happy Father's Day," he said, offering me the package and his electronic tablet. "Someone must think highly of you to pay for Sunday delivery." I signed my name, studying the shipping label as he walked away. There was no visible return address, just generic shipping information. The box felt surprisingly light for its size, about the dimensions of a shoebox but weighing maybe a couple of pounds at most. "Who's it from?" Linda called from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "No idea." I carried the package inside, setting it on the coffee table where the inheritance documents had been scattered just 6 days before. "No return address." She came closer, her expression curious but wary. Linda had always been more suspicious of unexpected deliveries than I was. Too many years of hearing about package bombs and mail scams on the evening news. "Maybe it's from the grandkids," she suggested, but her tone lacked conviction. Lucy had asked about Father's Day when we saw them last month, before Sophia weaponized them, before the threats and ultimatums. I pushed those thoughts away. "Could be," I nodded, though something didn't add up. The timing felt too convenient, too calculated, and Lucy wouldn't have paid for special Sunday delivery. Linda leaned in closer, examining the box with the methodical attention she applied to everything from grocery shopping to crossword puzzles. Her fingers traced the edges of the shipping label. "William," she said slowly, "don't open it." "Why not?" She pointed to something I had completely missed in my casual handling. "Don't you see the holes? They're for breathing, which means there's something alive inside." My stomach turned. Now that she'd pointed them out, I could see tiny perforations in the cardboard, barely visible unless you knew they were there. Small, precise holes someone had clearly poked on purpose. "Air holes," I repeated, my voice flat. "Something's alive in there," Linda confirmed, backing away from the coffee table. "The question is what?" We stood there in our living room, staring at the innocent-looking package as if it might suddenly sprout legs and run. The morning sunlight streaming through our windows seemed less warm now, the residential quiet, more ominous. "Who would send us something alive?" Linda whispered, but even as she asked the question, I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest, the timing, the anonymous sender. The Sunday delivery ensuring we'd be home and unsuspecting. This wasn't a gift. This was something else. From inside the box came the faintest sound, a soft, rustling scratch that made us both freeze. The sound stopped as quickly as it had begun, leaving us in a heavy silence. Linda grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin through the cotton of my polo shirt. "Did you hear that?" she breathed. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Whatever was in that box was very much alive, and it was waking up. A soft hissing sound emerged from the cardboard, barely audible but unmistakably real. We both froze, staring at the package as if it might explode. The sound stopped. The silence stretched between us like a held breath. Then it came again, longer this time. A distinct, dry hiss that chilled the blood in my veins. Linda's grip on my arm tightened until her nails bit through my shirt. "William," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Call someone. Now." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. Muscle memory took over as my mind scrambled to process what we were facing. The numbers felt strange under my trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? We have a suspicious package here, with something alive inside. The words tumbled out faster than I intended. It was delivered this morning with no return address and it's making noises. Sir, can you describe the sounds you're hearing? I looked at Linda, who nodded encouragingly. The hissing had stopped again, but we both knew it would be back. A hissing sound, I said, like a... I couldn't finish the sentence, like a snake. The thought felt too dangerous to say out loud. Is there any visible threat or damage to the package? No visible damage, but there are small holes poked in the cardboard. Air holes. My voice cracked on the last two words. Sir, I'm dispatching officers to your location immediately. Please maintain a safe distance from the package and do not attempt to open it. Can you move to another room? We're about 6 feet away in our living room. Should we leave the house? Stay inside, but keep your distance. Officers should be there in 10 minutes. Do not touch or move the package under any circumstances. The line was quiet except for the operator's typing. 10 minutes felt like an eternity when something dangerous was sitting on our coffee table, getting more active by the moment. Who could have done this, William? Linda asked once I'd hung up. The question I'd been dreading. The answer seemed obvious, but saying it out loud would make it real. It would acknowledge that our daughter had crossed a line I'd never imagined possible. I'm afraid to guess, I admitted, but my mind was already there, connecting dots I didn't want to see. The timing, on Father's Day, was no coincidence. The anonymous sender who knew our address, our schedules, our vulnerabilities. Someone angry enough about our recent fight to plan something this elaborate, this cruel. Another sound from the box made us both flinch, not just a hiss this time, but a rustling scrape that suggested movement, something shifting position within the confined space. The argument, Linda said quietly. 6 days ago, she was so angry when she left. She didn't need to say Sophia's name. We were both thinking it, both arriving at the same horrible conclusion through different paths of logic and dread. But this, I gestured toward the package, this isn't anger. This is something else. Revenge. The word hung between us, unspoken, too ugly to voice but impossible to ignore. Our daughter, the child we had raised, supported, and loved despite her flaws, had sent us something designed to frighten or to harm. The box rustled again, more insistently this time. Whatever was inside was definitely awake now, probably confused by its surroundings, possibly agitated by our voices and movement. What kind of person does this to their own parents? Linda's voice broke on the question. Someone desperate, I said, though the word felt inadequate. Someone who believes they've been wronged. But deep down, I knew it was more than desperation. This required planning, calculation, a level of malice that spoke to something broken in the relationship between parent and child. Sophia hadn't just lashed out in anger, she had engineered a deliberate act of psychological warfare. The sound of car doors slamming outside made us both jump. Through the front window, I could see a patrol car in our driveway. 2 officers were walking toward our door with the purposeful stride of people trained to handle dangerous situations. Relief flooded me so quickly it made my knees weak. Professional help had arrived. Soon, whatever nightmare lurked in that innocent-looking package would be someone else's responsibility to handle safely. The doorbell rang, sharp and authoritative in the tense quiet of our home. I opened the door before Officer Riley could knock a second time. His presence filled the doorway, tall, solidly built, with the practiced alertness of someone who'd handled domestic emergencies. The nameplate on his uniform read, T. Riley. Mr. Carson, I'm Officer Riley. We got your call about a suspicious package? Yes, thank you for coming so quickly. I stepped aside to let him in. It's in the living room. He wiped his boots on our doormat before crossing the threshold. Linda appeared in the hallway, still in her apron, hands twisting nervously. Officer, we're so grateful you're here. We didn't know what else to do. You did exactly the right thing, ma'am. His voice carried a calm authority. Can you show me the package? We led him into the living room, where the box sat on our coffee table, looking smaller now that professional help had arrived. Officer Riley approached it carefully, pulling latex gloves from his duty belt. When did this arrive? About 35 minutes ago, I said. Sunday delivery. Someone paid extra for the weekend service. He examined the shipping label without touching the box. No visible return address? And you heard sounds coming from inside? Hissing, Linda said quietly. She couldn't finish it. Like a snake, Officer Riley completed matter-of-factly. I've handled similar situations before, usually non-venomous, but we take every precaution. He reached for his radio. I'm going to call Animal Control. They have the proper equipment for a safe extraction. Dispatch, this is Unit 47 requesting Animal Control services at this address. Suspected snake delivery in a residential package. The radio crackled with confirmation. 20 minutes for an Animal Control response. Officer Riley turned back to us, shifting from procedural efficiency to investigative curiosity. Do you have any idea who might have sent this? The question I'd been dreading. I felt Linda's eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I don't know, I said carefully. Probably just some kids playing a prank. His gaze sharpened slightly. Kids would need access to live animals, shipping materials, knowledge of your address. This took planning and resources. My mouth went dry. He was right. Someone with means and motive had deliberately sent us a snake on Father's Day. Have you had any recent conflicts? Family disagreements? Family disagreements. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. Linda tensed beside me, both of us walking the tightrope between honesty and loyalty. Nothing that would lead to this, I managed to say. Officer Riley studied my face, noting the hesitation, but didn't press. Instead, he pulled out a small notepad. Any unusual charges on your credit cards recently? Pet stores? Exotic animal suppliers? The question hit me like a physical blow. Pet stores. The memory flooded back with terrible clarity. That charge I'd noted on last month's statement. Sophia used my credit card for emergencies. The Reptile Palace. $127.50. I'd assumed it was something for the grandkids, not a snake. Never a snake. Mr. Carson? Are you all right? I forced my expression back to neutral, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I'm fine, just processing all this. But I wasn't fine. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The timing, the knowledge of our routines, the access to my credit card, the deliberate cruelty of choosing Father's Day. My daughter had sent me a snake. Are you going to file a formal report? Officer Riley asked. We can investigate the package's origin. Press charges if we identify the sender. I looked at Linda. I saw the same conflict behind her eyes. Part of me wanted justice, but the larger part, the part that had spent 34 years protecting Sophia despite her flaws, couldn't turn her over to the police. No, I said quietly. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. If it's just a prank, pressing charges seems excessive. Officer Riley made a note, though his expression suggested he'd heard this answer before. Family loyalty trumping justice, even when family members crossed dangerous lines. Another vehicle pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I could see a white van with Animal Control Services painted on the side. That'll be Mike Sullivan, Officer Riley said. Best wildlife specialist in the county. He'll have this sorted out safely in no time. But as I watched the Animal Control officer grab his gear, I knew the real situation was just beginning. Mike Sullivan from Animal Control worked with the methodical efficiency of someone who had handled stranger situations than ours. Within 20 minutes, he had safely extracted a 3-foot corn snake from the shipping box, confirmed it was non-venomous, and loaded it into a secure carrier for transport to a local reptile rescue. Beautiful specimen, he said, securing the carrier in his van. Someone paid good money for this one. Corn snakes make great pets when they're cared for properly. Shame someone used it for, well, whatever this was. Officer Riley shook both our hands before leaving. Call if you remember anything else about potential senders, Mr. Carson. Even pranks like this can escalate if they're not checked. I nodded, maintaining the facade of cooperation while my mind churned with darker possibilities. Both vehicles disappeared down our quiet residential street, leaving Linda and me alone with the morning's aftermath. The living room felt different now, violated somehow, despite the professional cleanup. The coffee table had faint water streaks where Mike had disinfected the surface. The scattered inheritance documents had been stacked neatly, but their symbolic power had shifted. They were no longer tools of family planning, but evidence of the betrayal that had triggered this morning's events. Linda busied herself in the kitchen, running the faucet with unnecessary vigor. Stress cleaning, her standard response to family crises. I stood at the front window watching the Johnsons return from their Father's Day outing, their car loaded with picnic gear and the sounds of laughing children. Normal families, normal Sunday mornings, normal fathers who didn't receive malicious surprises from their daughters. The credit card charge burned in my memory like a brand. The Reptile Palace, $127, $50 3 weeks ago, right after our argument about the inheritance. Perfect timing to plan a retaliation. My phone felt heavy in my hands as I pulled up Sophia's contact information. Her smiling face looked back at me, a picture from Lucy's birthday party last year, before the financial demands had escalated, before the threats about access to the grandkids, before this morning's snake delivery. "Are you really going to call her?" Linda asked quietly from the kitchen doorway. "I need to know for sure." And if she admits it, the question hung between us like a dare. What would I do if my suspicions were confirmed? What action could a father take against a daughter who had crossed such a fundamental line? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew the conversation was necessary. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Dad?" Sophia's voice had an artificial brightness, the tone she used when she wanted something or was hiding something. "How's your Father's Day going?" My grip on the phone tightened. "How's my Father's Day going?" If she was innocent, the question was natural. If she was guilty, it was a cruel taunt. "An interesting morning." I kept my voice neutral, conversational. "Sophia, you wouldn't happen to know anything about a strange Father's Day gift, would you?" "No, Dad, what happened?" Her reply was quick, almost too quick, but it was what happened next that confirmed my worst suspicions. In the background, unmistakably, I heard Patrick's muffled laugh. Not the laugh of surprise from someone hearing unexpected news, but the satisfied chuckle of someone who thinks they have gotten away with something. The sound hit me like a physical blow. All doubt vanished in that moment of careless amusement. My daughter had sent me a snake, and her husband found it entertaining. "Just a mix-up with a delivery," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Nothing important. I should let you go." "You sure everything's okay? You sound weird." Weird. I was discovering that my only child had tried to terrorize me with a live reptile, and she thought I sounded weird. "Everything's fine, Sophia. Enjoy your Sunday." I hung up before she could reply, before my carefully maintained composure could shatter completely. The phone trembled in my hands as the full weight of the betrayal settled on me. Linda appeared at my side, reading my face with the intuition of 38 years of marriage. "Did you hear something?" Patrick laughed. The words came out flat, emotionless, in the background. When she asked what happened, he laughed, like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Her hand found my arm, a steadying presence in the shifting landscape of our family dynamic. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the phone, then toward my den, where the computer held the access to the bank accounts, credit cards, and all the financial tools that had kept Sophia afloat for 3 years. I'm going to teach my daughter what consequences means. By 7 p.m., I was sitting in my den, the door closed, the computer humming quietly in the evening stillness. I'd spent the afternoon in careful reflection, walking through our neighborhood, reviewing 30 years of financial decisions that had led us to this moment. The anger had settled into something colder, more resolute. My desk held the accumulated evidence of a father's generosity, bank statements showing monthly transfers to cover Sophia's rent, credit card bills I had paid without question, insurance premiums, car payments, emergency loans that were never repaid, 3 decades of enabling disguised as love. The leather portfolio next to my keyboard held documents I'd reviewed dozens of times, copies of checks written for her wedding, receipts from the car I'd sold to pay off her gambling debts, wire transfers labeled emergency assistance, which had become monthly obligations. Every piece of paper told the same story of a daughter who had learned to see her father as an endless source of cash instead of guidance. The computer screen glowed as I navigated to our online banking portal. My fingers moved steadily over the keyboard, typing in the familiar passwords I'd never shared with Sophia, though she'd managed to access so many without them. First, the credit card account, the same one showing the Reptile Palace charge from 3 weeks ago. Sophia was listed as an authorized user, a status I'd given her during college for emergencies, 20-year-old emergencies that had multiplied into a permanent lifestyle. I clicked on Manage Users. The system prompted me with security questions, my mother's maiden name, the street I grew up on, simple answers that unlocked access to tools I should have used years ago. Remove authorized user? The screen asked in neutral blue text. My cursor hovered over confirm for maybe 10 seconds, not out of hesitation, but because of the profound shift I felt happening inside me. 30 years I've funded your irresponsibility. Enough. I clicked. User access revoked. Changes will take effect in 1 business hour. Next came the PIN changes. Sophia had somehow learned the numbers, likely from looking over my shoulder during one of our many financial rescue missions. I selected new digits. The year Linda and I were married. Numbers that meant something to our partnership, but nothing to our daughter's plans. The automatic payments required more focus, monthly transfers to her checking account, the recurring payment for her car insurance, a gym membership she'd convinced me was essential for her mental health. Each cancellation required confirmation, a digital paper trail of my decision to stop being her private bank. My hands remained steady through the entire process. No shaking, no hesitation. This wasn't cruelty. It was long overdue accountability. I remembered the conversation last month when she called, sobbing about the gambling debts, how she'd promised this was the last time, the final crisis she'd need me to solve. I had believed her. I'd wired another $5,000 and told Linda we were helping our daughter learn responsibility. Instead, I'd been teaching her that consequences were optional. The final screen showed a summary of the changes. Credit access removed, automatic payments canceled, PIN codes updated, 30 years worth of enabling undone in 30 minutes of methodical clicks. Save changes. Outside my den window, the residential evening continued at its peaceful pace. The Johnsons were grilling dinner on their back patio. Mrs. Patterson was walking her small dog past our mailbox, normal families living normal lives, probably not dealing with adult children who send live snakes as Father's Day gifts. I clicked Save. The confirmation popped up instantly. Account changes processed. Updated information will be available immediately. Leaning back in my leather desk chair, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years regarding Sophia. Control. Not the desperate reactive scrambling to fix her latest crisis, but the quiet authority of a father who had finally remembered that love sometimes requires saying no. Tomorrow morning, she would discover that her financial safety net had been removed, her credit card would be declined, her automatic payments would bounce, her assumed access to my resources would simply end. For the first time in decades, the consequences of her choices would be entirely her own to manage. The phone on my desk remained silent, but I knew that wouldn't last long. The morning arrived with an unusual peace. I sat at our kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, watching the sunlight filter through Linda's herb garden on the windowsill. For the first time in years, I felt no anxiety about potential financial emergencies, no dread of manipulative phone calls. Linda moved quietly around the kitchen, refilling my coffee mug with the comfortable efficiency of 38 years of shared mornings. She hadn't asked questions about my evening in the den, but her slight smile suggested she understood perfectly what I had accomplished. The phone rang at 8:15 a.m. Sophia's name flashed on the caller ID, exactly as I expected. I let it ring twice more before answering, using those extra seconds to center myself. "Good morning, Sophia." "Dad, what did you do? My card's not working." Her voice hit me like a physical assault, shrill with panic. "I tried to buy groceries and it was declined. My car insurance payment bounced. What is going on?" I took a sip of coffee before answering. "Sophia, I know you sent me that Father's Day gift." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from panic to defensive fury. "Have you lost your mind? How could you set me up like this?" "Set you up? I don't... What are you talking about? Oh, what Father's Day gift?" The woman who had sent me a snake was now accusing me of setting her up. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "I just stopped paying for your irresponsibility." "This is insane. You can't just cut me off without warning. I have bills, obligations, responsibilities." Responsibilities. I let the word hang between us. Like the responsibility to treat your parents with basic respect, like the responsibility to manage your own finances instead of relying on mine. Linda had paused her morning routine to watch my face, reading my expressions for signs of stress, but I felt remarkably calm, almost detached from Sophia's hysteria. Dad, please, you don't understand. Patrick and I are struggling right now. The apartment rent is due, and my car payment. Your car payment that I've been making for 2 years. Your apartment rent that comes out of my account every month. Maybe it's time you understood what real financial responsibility looks like. Fine. You want to play hardball? Her voice rose to a pitch that would have worried me yesterday. Don't expect to see your grandkids anytime soon. Lucy and Matthew won't even remember you by the time. Sophia, I interrupted her, my voice quiet but firm. Those threats stopped working yesterday morning. The phone went silent, except for her ragged breathing. I could almost hear her recalibrating, searching for the manipulation tactic that had always worked before. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she whispered, shifting to the victim's voice that had opened my wallet countless times. I'm your daughter. I'm struggling. And instead of helping me, you're punishing me for something I didn't even do. Something I didn't even do. Still no direct denial. No confusion about which gift I meant. Just the blanket avoidance of someone who knew exactly what she'd done and was angry about facing the consequences. Your struggle is not my responsibility, I said. Your choices created your situation. Your choices sent that package. Your choices will determine what happens next. You're being ridiculous. One little prank and you completely lose your mind. One little prank. There it was. Not quite a confession, but close enough to confirm what her panicked reaction had already revealed. She had sent me a live snake as a little prank, and now expected me to continue funding her lifestyle. A prank involving an animal isn't little, Sophia, and a father cutting off financial support after 30 years of enabling isn't losing his mind. He's finally finding it. This isn't over, old man. You think you can control me by controlling the money? We'll see about that. The line went dead. I set the phone down gently and looked at Linda, who had watched the entire exchange with growing admiration. The morning sunlight still streamed in through her herbs. The coffee still tasted perfect. She's coming here, Linda said quietly. I nodded. Probably with Patrick. They'll want to continue this conversation in person. Are you ready for that? I thought about the question seriously. Was I ready for my daughter to arrive at our home with her unemployed husband, demanding access to money she'd never earned, threatening me with the grandkids she'd already weaponized? Yes, I said. I think I am. The sound of a car engine roaring into our driveway shattered the morning calm. Tires screeched on the pavement as the vehicle stopped abruptly, followed by the sharp slam of 2 doors. Linda and I exchanged a look. We both knew who had arrived. Heavy footsteps marched up our front path with a purposeful rhythm. The doorbell rang once, sharp and demanding, and then immediately again when no one answered fast enough. I stood up slowly, feeling remarkably calm despite the coming storm. Stay here, I told Linda quietly. No, her voice had an unexpected strength. We're in this together. The doorbell gave way to aggressive pounding. I walked to the front entry and opened it to find Sophia and Patrick standing on our porch like a 2-person army ready for battle. Sophia's face was blotchy with rage, her hair disheveled as if she'd dressed hastily and driven here in a fury. Patrick loomed behind her, his expression dark with a malice I'd never seen directed at me before. Dad, Sophia's voice vibrated with barely contained rage. We need to talk. We already spoke this morning. I remained in the threshold, not inviting them in. I thought I was quite clear. Clear? She laughed harshly. You were insane. You can't just cut me off over some ridiculous misunderstanding about a Father's Day package. Even now, standing on my doorstep demanding money, she couldn't admit what she'd done. There's no misunderstanding, Sophia. You sent me a snake. I responded appropriately. Patrick stepped forward, his bulk filling more of the doorway. Look, old man, maybe you didn't think this through. Sophia has expenses, responsibilities. The kids need things. Kids whose mother threatens to keep them from their grandparents when she doesn't get money, I replied calmly. Sophia's face contorted with desperate fury. Fine. You want to play hardball? You will never see your grandchildren again. Lucy and Matthew will grow up knowing their grandfather chose money over family. The words that had once been my greatest fear now felt impotent against the clarity I'd gained. I looked at my daughter, and I didn't see the little girl I'd raised, but the manipulative stranger she had become. "Sophia," I said quietly, "that's not a threat. It's a blessing." The shock on her face was total. That was not the answer she expected, not the devastating blow that had always brought me to my knees before. Patrick's jaw dropped. "What? What?" Sophia stammered. "If you are the kind of person who uses children as weapons against their grandparents, then maybe it's better they're not exposed to that kind of manipulation while they're young." Patrick's expression shifted into something darker. He moved close enough that I could smell the anger radiating off him. "We know where you live, old man," he said, his voice low and threatening. "We know your routines, your schedule. You might want to reconsider your position." I felt Linda tense behind me, but I remained perfectly still. "Are you threatening me, Patrick?" "I'm just saying, family relationships work both ways. You want to cut us off? Fine. But don't expect us to just disappear quietly." "In fact," I said, "that's exactly what I expect. And if you choose not to disappear quietly, that becomes a matter for the police rather than a family negotiation." Sophia grabbed Patrick's arm, perhaps sensing he was moving into territory that could have legal consequences, but her touch didn't calm him. It seemed to fuel his aggression. "You think you're so smart?" Patrick continued. "Think cutting us off makes you powerful? There are other ways to get what we need." "So, I'm sure there are. Like getting a job, for instance. A novel concept, but people have supported themselves through employment for centuries." "This isn't over," Sophia hissed, her desperation morphing into pure venom. "You will regret treating us like this. Family doesn't abandon family, and there will be consequences." "There already are consequences," I said. "You're living them right now." They stared at me for a long moment, perhaps finally understanding that no amount of threats, guilt, or manipulation was going to restore their access to my resources. The man who had spent 30 years being their personal bank had just closed. Without another word, Sophia spun on her heel and stalked back to their car. Patrick followed, but not before giving me one last menacing look. I watched them drive away, their car's engine revving unnecessarily loud. Only when their taillights had disappeared did I close the front door and turn to Linda. Her face was pale, but her eyes held something I hadn't seen in years. Pride. "We're going to need legal advice," I said. The night brought the quiet normalcy that had become precious in our home. Linda and I sat at our kitchen table after dinner, the domestic routine providing comfort after the morning's chaos. She sipped chamomile tea while I savored a second cup of coffee, both of us processing the day's events. The kitchen had always been our sanctuary for serious conversations. It was here we'd discussed buying the house, planned for retirement, talked through worries about Sophia's early problems with money. Now, it served as the place where we contemplated the complete breakdown of our family relationship. "I keep thinking about when she was 8, Linda said quietly. "Remember that Mother's Day breakfast she made? Burnt toast and orange juice with way too much pulp, but she was so proud." I did remember. Sophia in her pink pajamas, standing on a kitchen stool to reach the counter, determined to surprise us with breakfast in bed. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's family now. "She used to draw us pictures," I said. "Stick figures of our family, holding hands. I kept them in my desk drawer at the office for years. I still have some. In that memory box upstairs." Linda's voice carried a maternal grief. "William, she's still our daughter, despite everything that's happened today." The words I'd been waiting for all day. Linda's instinct to heal, to find a middle ground, to somehow restore what was broken. It was one of the qualities I'd fallen in love with, that unshakable belief that families could overcome anything. "Lynn," I said softly. "She crossed a line, and I have one more step to take." Her teacup paused halfway to her lips. "What kind of step?" I looked at my wife's face, seeing the worry there, the hope that whatever I was planning might somehow bring our daughter back instead of pushing her further away. How could I explain that bringing her back was no longer the goal? "Something permanent," I said, something that ensures this morning's scene never, ever happens again. You're talking about changing the will. It wasn't a question. Linda knew me well enough to follow my thought process, to understand that legal protection was the only solution left. Among other things. Yes. She was silent for a long moment, struggling with the implications. Changing our estate plan would be more than a financial decision. It would be a formal acknowledgement that our daughter was no longer trustworthy. The grandkids, she said finally, Lucy and Matthew. They'll be better off not learning that love can be bought with money. I reached for her hand across the table. Linda, what she did today, that wasn't desperation. It was calculated cruelty. The snake, the threats, the manipulation. That is who she has chosen to become. But if we cut her out completely, we protect ourselves from future abuse. We protect our marriage from being constantly in management of her crises. We protect our retirement from being slowly drained by someone who sees us as a resource instead of parents. Linda squeezed my hand, her thumb tracing my knuckles, the gesture that had comforted me through decades of smaller challenges. This was not a small challenge. This was the end of something fundamental. Will it stop her? She asked. If you change everything legally, will she finally leave us alone? It will remove her incentive for contact, no access to money, no inheritance to protect, no leverage to maintain. She'll have to find other people to manipulate. The pragmatism of it felt cold but necessary. Sophia would move on to easier targets, people who hadn't yet learned to recognize her patterns. I hate that it's come to this, Linda whispered. Me too. But I will not spend our remaining years being held hostage by threats and manipulation. I will not let her destroy what we've built together. Outside our kitchen window, the residential evening continued its peaceful pace. The Johnsons walked their dog. Mrs. Patterson watered her garden, normal people living normal lives. When will you do it? Linda asked. Tomorrow morning. I'll call Margaret Shaw first thing. She's handled our legal affairs for 15 years. She'll know exactly what needs to be done to make it ironclad. Linda nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable, even as it broke her heart. And if Sophia finds out? She will, eventually. But by then, the legal protections will be in place. Her anger won't be able to touch us anymore. I rose from the table, taking our empty mugs to the sink. Behind me, I heard Linda's quiet sigh. Not of disagreement, but of grief for the daughter we had lost. Tomorrow, I would take that final step. Tonight, I would hold my wife and let her mourn for the family we thought we were. Margaret Shaw's law office took up the 3rd floor of a granite building downtown, its walls lined with legal volumes that spoke to 15 years of protecting families like ours. I sat across from her mahogany desk with a folder of documents, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. William, she said, taking off her reading glasses, when you called this morning, you mentioned needing comprehensive legal protection. Tell me what's been going on. Margaret had handled our wills, property transfers, and Linda's mother's estate. She knew us as the stable couple who planned ahead and paid their bills on time. What I was about to describe would sound like a different family entirely. I explained the inheritance argument, the snake delivery, the locked credit cards, yesterday's threatening confrontation. Margaret listened without interruption, making occasional notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. Patrick said, "We know where you live. We know your routines," I concluded. It felt like a direct threat. She put her pen down and leaned back. "William, this goes beyond a family disagreement. You're describing harassment and intimidation. We need to address this on multiple fronts." "That's what I was hoping you'd say." Margaret pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Let's start with your will. You mentioned you wanted to restructure your inheritance." "I want my money to go to my grandchildren's education, not my daughter's casino," I said. "That's a wise decision." Margaret's voice carried a professional warmth. "We can create an educational trust that will provide for Lucy and Matthew's schooling, college expenses, and legitimate educational needs while walling off any access by their parents." She sketched out the framework. An independent trustee would manage the funds, releasing money only for documented educational expenses. Sophia and Patrick would have no access, no control, and no ability to manipulate the children's inheritance. "And Linda?" I asked. "Fully protected, of course. The house, your retirement accounts, her security. Nothing changes there. This only affects what would have gone to Sophia. Next came the restraining order paperwork. Margaret opened a new file and began to systematically log yesterday's confrontation, the threatening language, the escalating pattern that had culminated in real intimidation. "The snake incident is particularly concerning," she said, typing quickly. "Using live animals to frighten elderly parents shows a planning and a malice that the courts take very seriously. How long does this process take? The will amendments can be finalized within a week. The restraining order can be filed today. Once it's granted, any contact from Sophia or Patrick becomes a legal matter rather than a family dispute." I felt something release in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for months, the weight of being perpetually on call for Sophia's crises, of walking on eggshells to avoid triggering her threats, of enabling destructive behavior. It was all ending. "There's one more thing," Margaret said. "Based on what you've described, I recommend documenting everything for potential future legal action. Keep records of any attempted contact, any violations, any attempts to involve the grandkids." "You think it will get worse before it gets better?" People who use manipulation and threats don't typically accept boundaries gracefully. When Sophia discovers she's been written out of your will and served with a restraining order, her reaction may be significant. But that didn't scare me anymore. With legal protections in place, her anger would be aimed at a system designed to handle such behavior, not at two elderly parents trying to enjoy their retirement. Margaret's assistant brought in the prepared documents. As I signed my name on each page, I felt the satisfying finality of decisions made and implemented. 30 years of financial enabling were officially over. Our home would be legally protected from harassment. "The restraining order should be approved by the end of today's business," Margaret said. "Court officers will serve both Sophia and Patrick tomorrow morning. After that, any contact with you or Linda becomes a criminal matter." I stood to leave, shaking the hand of the woman who had just helped me reclaim control of my own life. Outside her office windows, the city continued its normal rhythm. "William," Margaret called as I reached her door, "you've made the right decisions. Your and your family's safety and well-being come first." I nodded, tucking the folder under my arm. Tomorrow morning, Sophia would find out that manipulation was no longer an option. Tonight, Linda and I would sleep peacefully, knowing the law was finally on our side. 2 days passed in the most peaceful quiet I'd experienced in years. Linda and I fell back into the comfortable routines that had been constantly interrupted by Sophia's crises. Morning coffee without dreading phone calls, afternoon walks without checking for missed texts, evening dinners without discussing the latest financial emergency. On Thursday afternoon, Margaret called to confirm what I'd been anticipating. "William, the papers were served at 2:15 today. Both Sophia and Patrick have been notified of the restraining order and have received copies of the will amendments. It's done." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat quietly in my chair for several minutes. Outside our window, Mrs. Patterson was planting spring flowers in her garden. The Johnson kids were riding bikes on the sidewalk. Normal residential life continuing its peaceful rhythm. "The papers were served?" Linda asked from the kitchen doorway. "This afternoon," I confirmed. "It's over." She sat down beside me, taking my hand in hers. We didn't need to discuss what Sophia's reaction might be, or whether she'd try to find ways around the legal barriers Margaret had erected. The law was clear. The protections were comprehensive, and for the first time in 30 years, we were truly free from her manipulation. I thought about the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who drew stick figure families and made breakfast in bed on special occasions. That little girl had grown into someone who sent live snakes to her father and threatened to use her children as weapons against him. The transformation had been gradual enough that I'd spent decades making excuses for increasingly unacceptable behavior. But the woman who had stood on my doorstep demanding money and making threats was not someone I needed to continue enabling. The legal documents had created the boundaries that love alone never could. "They got what they wanted," I said. "I'm no longer in their lives." The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophia had spent years threatening to cut off my access to Lucy and Matthew every time I failed to meet her financial demands. Now, through her own escalating behavior, She had ensured that separation permanently, while also forfeiting any claim to the inheritance she had been so desperate to control. Lucy and Matthew would be provided for through their educational trust, managed by professionals who couldn't be manipulated or threatened. Their college tuition, tutoring, books, legitimate educational needs, all secured without giving their parents access to resources they'd proven incapable of managing responsibly. Linda squeezed my hand. "Do you think she understands what she's lost?" "She will," I said. "The restraining order means any attempt to contact us becomes a criminal matter. The will changes mean there's no inheritance to fight for, no financial incentive to maintain even hostile contact. She'll have to find other people to manipulate, and if she violates the restraining order, then she becomes the police department's problem, not ours." For 30 years, I had been Sophia's safety net, catching her every time she fell while she learned nothing from the experience. I'd sold my classic car to pay her gambling debts. I'd covered her rent when she claimed unexpected emergencies. I'd written check after check, always believing that this time would be different. This crisis would be the last. The snake had been her final communication with me. Everything she wanted to say about our relationship had been contained in that box, dangerous, malicious, designed to frighten and intimidate. But instead of bullying me back into compliance, it had driven me to Margaret's office and to the legal protections I should have sought years ago. As the sun set through our kitchen window, Linda and I prepared dinner together with the easy cooperation of a couple no longer burdened by constant family drama. No phone calls interrupted our conversation. No emergency texts demanded an immediate financial rescue. No threats loomed over our heads about access to our grandkids. The quiet felt profound, like the silence after a long, exhausting storm has finally passed. Tomorrow, we would wake up in a home legally protected from harassment. Our retirement savings would remain intact, earning interest for our own security instead of being slowly drained by someone else's poor choices. Our marriage would continue without the constant stress of managing an adult daughter's manufactured crises. I had reclaimed my role as a father who loved his daughter enough to refuse to enable her destruction of herself and others. Legal boundaries had replaced emotional manipulation. Professional consequences had replaced family guilt. The law had given me my life back. Tonight, for the first time in decades, I would sleep without wondering what tomorrow's crisis would cost me.